Humiliated for their modest clothes and black skin, they were chased from the glittering showroom by a salesman's sneer. People like you can't afford it. The next day, their billionaire CEO's son, Michael Carter, returned. With them, and a silent, imposing Rolls-Royce Spectre blocking the entrance. As they stepped out, dressed exactly as before, into the stunned silence of the dealership, Michael's cold gaze found the man who'd judged them unworthy. Prejudice just met its reckoning. Find out what happens when dignity demands its due. The automatic doors of Apex Automotive Imports slid open with a sigh, releasing a wave of climate-controlled air, heavy with the scent of expensive leather and refined ambition. Into this curated atmosphere stepped Eleanor and James Carter, figures etched with the quiet grace of years lived fully, yet dressed in clothes that spoke of comfort rather than conquest. James wore a meticulously kept, but undeniably old, tweed jacket over a soft flannel shirt, his hands clasped gently behind his back. Eleanor, beside him, had a simple wool coat cinched at the waist, her silver hair swept up, revealing earrings that were elegant but understated, perhaps family heirlooms. They moved with a deliberate slowness, not out of infirmity, but as if measuring the space, absorbing the gleaming monuments to engineering and wealth that surrounded them. The dealership floor was a landscape of polished concrete and strategically placed spotlights, making gods of the machines they illuminated. A low murmur of conversation, punctuated by the occasional satisfied laugh, drifted from clusters of sharp-suited associates and customers radiating effortless prosperity. As Eleanor and James paused near a low-slung coupe, its obsidian paint seeming to drink the light, the ambient hum noticeably dipped. Glances, quick and appraising, flickered towards them. A woman in sharp athleisure wear, discussing financing options with practiced ease, subtly shifted her stance, turning her shoulder almost imperceptibly away. From across the showroom, Preston Vance watched their approach. Preston cultivated an image as meticulously as the dealership polished its chrome, razor-sharp suit, aggressively modern watch, a smile that could disarm or dismiss with equal precision. He saw the Carters not as potential clients, but as incongruities, smudges on the gallery's pristine canvas. He caught the eye of a younger associate, Mark, and gave a minute, almost imperceptible shake of his head, accompanied by a tightening around his lips that passed for a smirk. Tourists, the look implied. Or worse. Eleanor's hand found James's arm. Perhaps we should just look from the window, dear, she murmured, her voice barely audible above the distant purr of a barely contained engine being discussed nearby. Nonsense, Ellie, James replied, his voice calm but carrying a low thrum of resolve. He met the curious, borderline hostile stares with a quiet dignity that seemed to baffle them more than defiance would have. We have as much right to admire craftsmanship as anyone. He gestured towards the obsidian coupe. This engine layout, fascinating. Preston decided it was time to manage the situation. He glided towards them, his expensive Italian shoes whispering on the floor. He stopped a calculated distance away, creating an invisible barrier. Good morning, he began, his tone pitched for public pleasantness but underscored with a steely edge. Can I help you find something, perhaps more suited to your needs? We do have partnerships with several excellent pre-owned dealerships nearby. The implication hung heavy in the air. You don't belong here. You can't afford to breathe this air, let alone buy. James's eyes, deep-set and wise, held Preston's gaze. We're interested in this model, actually. The torque specifications. Preston cut him off with a tight smile that didn't reach his cold, blue eyes. Sir, with all due respect, this vehicle starts well over $900,000. It requires a significant financial portfolio for consideration, not just curiosity. He let his gaze drift pointedly over James's tweed jacket, then Eleanor's simple coat. Perhaps browsing the online configurator would be a more efficient use of everyone's time? The air crackled. Nearby conversations faltered again. The woman in athleisure were now openly stared, a flicker of disdain crossing her features. Humiliation washed over Eleanor, a cold tide that made her cheeks burn. James stood straighter, his hand tightening almost imperceptibly on Eleanor's arm. The politeness was a veneer, the contempt beneath it raw and undisguised. It wasn't just about the clothes, it felt older, deeper, a familiar chill they had hoped this echelon of society might have insulated them from. I see, James said, his voice quiet but resonant. "Thank you for your efficiency." He turned, guiding Eleanor gently back towards the entrance. They walked past the gleaming machines, under the judgmental eyes, the weight of unspoken accusations pressing down on them. Near the service desk, Emily Torres, a young Latina associate known for her sharp technical knowledge and quiet empathy, watched them leave. She'd seen Preston's approach, recognized the practiced condescension. A knot tightened in her stomach. She'd started to move, to offer assistance herself, but Preston had been too quick, his dismissal too final. She saw the slump in James's shoulders as he passed through the doors, the tremor in Eleanor's hand. The whisper of the closing doors sounded unervingly like a final judgment. Emily gripped the tablet in her hand, the smooth metal suddenly feeling cold and alien. The drive back to their sprawling, yet unpretentious, home in the wooded hills outside the city was steeped in a thick, uncomfortable silence. The familiar comfort of their aging but meticulously maintained sedan usually eased James's mind, but today the engine's hum felt like a grating noise against the backdrop of their shared humiliation. Eleanor stared out the window, the passing landscape of late autumn trees a blur of russet and gold that couldn't penetrate the gray fog that had settled in her heart. It wasn't the first time. Decades of navigating a world that often judged them first by their skin and second by their perceived station had built calluses, but some wounds always felt fresh. The sheer, naked arrogance of the salesman, the casual cruelty cloaked in professional jargon, it had struck a nerve left unexpectedly raw. They hadn't sought validation, only the simple pleasure of appreciating automotive artistry, a passion James had nurtured since boyhood. Their son, Michael Carter, found them in the library later that evening. It was a room filled with books, art, and the quiet hum of lives lived with intellectual curiosity and understated success. Usually, returning from his downtown office, the nerve center of a tech empire he'd built from sheer grit and brilliance, Michael would find his parents engaged in lively debate or quiet companionship. Tonight, the silence was palpable, heavy as unshed tears. Eleanor sat nursing a cup of tea, her gaze distant. James stood by the fireplace, staring into the unlit hearth, the posture of a man carrying an invisible weight. Michael, whose tailored suit couldn't quite conceal the coiled energy of a man accustomed to command, sensed the disturbance immediately. His parents were pillars of quiet strength, their resilience a bedrock upon which he'd built his own life. Seeing them diminished, wounded, sent a cold spike of anger through him. "Mom? Dad?" he asked softly, loosening his tie as he crossed the room. "Everything all right? You both seem distant." Eleanor looked up, attempting a smile that faltered. "Just a long day, dear. We went to look at that new electric coupe James has been reading about." James turned from the fireplace, his expression carefully neutral. The dealership wasn't quite welcoming. Michael's eyes narrowed. He knew that coded language. He'd heard variations of it whispered in boardrooms, felt its chill in networking events, seen its shadow fall across opportunities despite his undeniable success. Unwelcoming how? He pressed gently, sitting opposite his mother, his gaze steady. Slowly, haltingly, they recounted the incident. Not with bitterness, but with a weary sadness that cut Michael deeper than rage would have. They spoke of Preston Vance's thinly veiled insults, the dismissive wave towards pre-owned lots, the explicit mention of the price tag as an insurmountable barrier meant for people like them. As James spoke the salesman's words, portfolio for consideration, not just curiosity, Michael felt a familiar, cold fury ignite deep within him. It was the same fire that had fueled his relentless drive, the same anger he channeled into building something undeniably excellent, something that forced the world to acknowledge his worth on his terms. But hearing it directed at his parents, these gentle, dignified souls who asked so little and deserved so much respect, felt like a personal violation. "He judged you," Michael stated, his voice dangerously quiet. "He looked at your clothes, at your skin, and decided your worth." "It wasn't just him, Michael," Eleanor added softly, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for his. "It was the looks, the whispers. As if we were contaminants." Michael clenched his jaw, the muscles tight. He saw the hurt in his mother's eyes, the quiet resignation settling back over his father. This wasn't just about a rude salesman. It was about the persistence of a poison, the insidious way prejudice seeped even into spaces supposedly governed by objective commerce. He had built walls of success around his family, fortresses of achievement, yet the old ugliness could still find the cracks, could still wound them in the heart of their own city. This, Michael said, his voice low but vibrating with controlled intensity, will not stand. He wasn't thinking of simple revenge. He was thinking of a lesson. A statement. One delivered with the undeniable weight of consequence, echoing far beyond the polished floors of Apex Automotive Imports. He looked at his parents, their quiet pain fueling a cold, clear purpose within him. The silence in the room now wasn't one of defeat, but of gathering storm. The following morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of bright autumn day that usually felt full of promise. But for the staff at Apex Automotive Imports, the promise was shattered shortly after 9 a.m. It wasn't the usual discreet arrival of a client in a luxury sedan. Instead, a vehicle unlike anything most of them had seen outside of exclusive auto shows ghosted to a halt directly before the main entrance, occupying the space normally reserved for test drive departures. It was a Rolls-Royce Spectre, the marque's first fully electric car, rendered in a bespoke shade of deep midnight blue that seemed to absorb the morning sun and hold it captive. Its sheer presence was magnetic, a silent, monolithic statement of futuristic luxury and immense wealth. The car's arrival brought the showroom to a standstill. Conversations ceased. Heads turned. Even the usually unflappable senior associates lowered their tablets, staring. Preston Vance was holding court near the front desk, regaling Mark with an embellished story of a past conquest sale, when the Spectre materialized. His narrative faltered. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. Who dared block the entrance with such ostentation? Then, annoyance curdled into stunned disbelief as the driver's door opened with silent, electric grace. Michael Carter emerged. He wasn't wearing the power suit of yesterday. Today, it was understated cashmere, tailored slacks, and shoes that whispered quiet expense rather than shouting it. His demeanor was calm, almost serene, but his eyes held a focus that swept the showroom, missing nothing. Before anyone could fully process his arrival, the passenger door opened. James Carter stepped out, followed by Eleanor. They wore the exact same clothes as the day before, the tweed jacket, the simple wool coat. They stood beside their son, their quiet dignity now amplified by the impossible context, framed by the Spectre's imposing silhouette. Preston went pale. The blood drained from his face, leaving his meticulously tanned skin looking sallow. Mark gaped openly. Whispers erupted like brushfire through the showroom. Is that them? The couple from yesterday? With him? Michael didn't acknowledge the stares or the frantic murmurs. He offered his arm to his mother, and together, the three of them walked towards the entrance. The automatic doors slid open, admitting them into the suddenly charged atmosphere. The air hummed, not with commerce, but with palpable tension and dawning, horrified realization. Preston, momentarily paralyzed, forced himself into motion, intercepting them just inside the doorway. His practiced smile was gone, replaced by a mask of strained professionalism. Mr. Carter, he stammered, recognizing Michael from financial news profiles. Welcome to Apex. I apologize if there was any misunderstanding yesterday. Michael met his gaze, his expression unreadable. There was no misunderstanding, Mr. Vance. There was an assumption. A judgment rendered swiftly and, as it turns out, quite inaccurately. His voice was level, devoid of overt anger, yet it carried an authority that silenced the surrounding whispers. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence, flanked by his parents and the silent testament of the Spectre waiting outside, was indictment enough. He surveyed the showroom, his gaze lingering on the faces of those who had watched his parents' humiliation the day before. He saw surprise, embarrassment, and in some, a dawning fear. Emily Torres stood near the back, her heart pounding. She watched Michael, recognizing the controlled power in his stance, the unwavering support he offered his parents. She saw the way Preston visibly flinched under that calm gaze. This wasn't just a wealthy client returning, this felt like a reckoning. Michael turned his attention back to Preston, whose Adam's apple bobbed nervously. My parents came here yesterday with a genuine interest in automotive excellence. They were treated, Michael paused, letting the word hang, poorly. Based on assumptions about their appearance. About their race. He didn't accuse, he stated facts, each one landing like a precisely placed blow. Tell me, Mr. Vance, does Apex Automotive have a policy regarding such judgments? Preston floundered. No, sir, absolutely not. We value all potential clients. It was a misinterpretation of what? Michael interrupted, his voice still quiet but cutting. Of their dignity? Of their right to be treated with basic human respect, regardless of the car they arrive in or the clothes they wear? He took a step closer, lowering his voice further, forcing Preston to lean in slightly. Or was it something else, Mr. Vance? Something uglier? The question hung between them, thick with unspoken history and the raw nerve of prejudice. The tension in the showroom became almost unbearable, a silent storm about to break. The charged silence stretched, amplifying the frantic pulse hammering in Preston Vance's temples. He felt trapped, pinned by Michael Carter's unwavering gaze and the weight of dozens of pairs of eyes, colleagues, customers, all witnesses to his unraveling. He opened his mouth, searching for a denial, an excuse, anything to deflect the calm, devastating certainty emanating from the man before him. Before Preston could formulate a response, a new figure entered the tableau. Arthur Sterling, the dealership's general manager, emerged from his glass-walled office at the rear. Sterling was a man whose silver hair and impeccable tailoring projected authority, but whose eyes now held a flicker of barely concealed panic. He'd seen the Spectre, heard the commotion, and instantly grasped the potential for a catastrophic PR disaster. Mr. Carter, Sterling said, extending a hand, his voice smooth but tight. Arthur Sterling. Please, accept my sincerest apologies for any negative experience your parents may have had yesterday. It is certainly not reflective of our standards. Michael ignored the outstretched hand. His focus remained laser-sharp. Mr. Sterling. Your standards appear to be flexible, depending on who walks through that door. My parents, he gestured towards Eleanor and James, who stood with quiet composure, were subjected to racial profiling and class-based discrimination by your associate, Mr. Vance. Here. Yesterday, Sterling's face tightened. Mr. Carter, I assure you, we will conduct a thorough internal investigation. There's no need for a lengthy investigation, Michael countered, his voice hardening slightly. Mr. Vance's performance was quite public. Ask your staff. Check your security footage, though I suspect the audio won't capture the nuance of his contempt. He paused, letting the implications sink in. But perhaps a more immediate form of clarification is required. Michael subtly retrieved his phone. With a few taps, a discreet notification likely pinged phones belonging to certain influential journalists and social media commentators he kept on retainer for his corporation's PR. He wasn't live streaming, not yet, but the potential hung in the air like static electricity. Apex Automotive prides itself on exclusivity, on reputation, Michael continued, addressing Sterling but loud enough for the room to hear. How exclusive will it feel when the story breaks about how you treat potential clients based on the color of their skin? Sterling visibly paled. The carefully constructed facade of unflappable control crumbled. He shot a venomous glare at Preston, who looked as if he might faint. This is unacceptable, Sterling stammered, turning back to Michael. Mr. Vance's actions, if as described, are grounds for immediate disciplinary action. Termination. Termination is a corporate solution, Mr. Sterling, Michael replied coolly. It addresses your liability. It doesn't address the underlying culture that allowed Mr. Vance to feel comfortable, even validated, in his behavior. It doesn't restore the dignity stripped from my parents. His gaze swept the room again, finally landing on Emily Torres, who stood watching, her expression a mixture of apprehension and validation. Ms. Torres, Michael called out, his voice softening slightly. Emily started, surprised to be addressed directly. Yes, Mr. Carter, my parents mentioned one associate yesterday treated them with kindness. Someone who saw them as people, not stereotypes. Was that you, Ms. Torres? Emily hesitated for a fraction of a second, acutely aware of every eye now on her. She glanced at Sterling's strained face, at Preston's look of desperate appeal. Then she met Michael's gaze directly. I tried to assist Mr. and Mrs. Carter, sir, she said, her voice clear and steady. I believe everyone deserves respect when they walk through our doors. What happened yesterday was wrong, a murmur went through the staff. Emily's quiet courage, standing in contrast to the pervasive discomfort and Preston's disgrace, was palpable. Michael nodded slowly, a flicker of genuine appreciation in his eyes. He turned back to Sterling. I came here today considering the purchase of the Spectre outside, and perhaps the coupe my parents admired yesterday. A significant transaction. He let that sink in. But my business is contingent. Contingent on more than just firing one prejudiced salesman. Contingent on demonstrated change. He then looked directly at Emily. And contingent on rewarding integrity. Ms. Torres, I understand commissions here are substantial. If I proceed, the entire commission for both vehicles would be yours. Furthermore, he glanced at Sterling, adding pressure, I'd expect Apex to recognize talent that aligns with basic human decency. A promotion seems appropriate. Sterling, caught between outrage, fear, and avarice, nodded quickly. Absolutely, Mr. Carter. Ms. Torres is an exemplary employee. A promotion to senior client advisor is effective immediately. Preston stared, aghast, as his career evaporated and his potential commission, likely the largest of his life, was handed to the colleague he likely barely registered. Emily looked stunned, overwhelmed by the sudden, dramatic turn of events. Michael Carter hadn't just demanded retribution, he had reshaped the power dynamic within the dealership in a matter of minutes, using his influence not just to punish, but to elevate and potentially, initiate change. The reckoning had arrived, but its final form remained uncertain. The immediate storm passed, leaving behind a heavy, unsettled atmosphere. Michael Carter, having made his point with surgical precision, didn't immediately sign the paperwork for the cars. He spoke quietly with Sterling for a few minutes, outlining expectations for mandatory, comprehensive anti-bias training for all staff, monitored progress reports, and a public statement from Apex acknowledging the incident and committing to inclusivity, delivered not through corporate speak, but with genuine accountability. The purchase, he clarified, would proceed after tangible steps were taken. He then turned to Emily, whose face was a complex mix of gratitude, shock, and a dawning unease. Ms. Torres, he said, his voice lower now, more personal. Your integrity is valuable. This promotion, the commission, they are earned. But, he added, his gaze searching hers, ensure this place doesn't dilute what makes you valuable. Real change requires more than one symbolic act. He offered her his personal contact information. If you ever feel your values are compromised here, or if you aspire beyond these walls, reach out. Talent and integrity deserve the right environment. With a final nod to Sterling, Michael gently guided his parents out of the dealership. There was no triumphant exit, no gloating. They walked with the same quiet dignity they had arrived with, leaving the Spectre parked conspicuously out front, a silent, gleaming reminder of the morning's upheaval and the conditions yet unmet. The automatic doors closed behind them, muffling the frantic buzz that immediately erupted inside. Preston Vance wasn't fired on the spot. Sterling, ever conscious of legalities and optics, placed him on immediate, indefinite suspension pending the outcome of the now unavoidable, internal investigation. But everyone knew it was a formality. Preston gathered his personal effects under the averted gazes of his colleagues, his face a mask of numb disbelief and simmering resentment. His departure was ignominious, stripped of the arrogance that had been his shield. Emily stood near her desk, the weight of her sudden promotion and the potential windfall settling upon her. Colleagues offered hesitant congratulations, their eyes filled with a mixture of envy, awe, and perhaps, a touch of fear. Had she just won the lottery, or had she been drawn into a high-stakes game she didn't fully understand? Michael Carter's final words echoed in her mind, ensure this place doesn't dilute what makes you valuable. She looked around the showroom, at the gleaming cars, the anxious faces of her colleagues, the calculating expression on Sterling's face as he took a call, likely already strategizing damage control. Was this a genuine turning point, or just a temporary disruption before the powerful currents of habit and prejudice pulled everything back to the status quo? Outside, as Michael drove his parents home in their familiar sedan, the Spectre would be collected later. The silence returned, but it was different. The raw wound of humiliation had been acknowledged, lanced by Michael's decisive action. Yet, Eleanor still felt a lingering ache. He did what was right, Michael, she said softly, touching his arm. But does it truly change anything? For the next person who walks in looking different? James nodded slowly. Dignity isn't something that can be bought or returned, son. It must be recognized inherently. Today was a statement, a powerful one. But the real work, that continues. Michael gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white for a moment before he consciously relaxed them. I know, Dad. Today wasn't an ending. It was forcing a conversation, holding up a mirror. Whether they truly see the reflection, that's the question. Back at Apex Automotive, as the afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows, a new customer walked in, affluent, white, impeccably dressed. The remaining associates, including the newly promoted Emily Torres, snapped back into their professional roles, smiles automatically adjusting, greetings ready. The machine of commerce restarted. Emily watched the familiar dance begin, a knot of uncertainty tightening in her chest. Had the foundation truly shifted, or had they merely witnessed a tremor, powerful but ultimately temporary, on ground that remained stubbornly resistant to fundamental change? The answer, she suspected, lay not just in corporate policies or sensitivity training, but in the quiet, daily choices each person within those walls would make long after the Spectre and the Carters were gone. The echoes of the morning lingered, posing a silent, persistent question of responsibility that hung, unresolved, in the expensive air.